My name is Lycia Heath. I'm the CEO of Women for Election Australia. We're a non-partisan organisation that helps to inspire, but also to train more women to run for public office. I'm coming to you today from the lands of the Gadigal and Bidjigal people of the Eora Nation, also known as Sydney's Eastern Beaches. And I would like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and also to future emerging leaders, and also acknowledge that sovereignty of this land was never ceded. And it's my belief that until we reach a treaty with First Nations people, then our ability to move forward together in harmony is compromised. Please feel very free to put in the chat where you may be joining us from today, not where you may be, where you are. Because it's always nice to see, because people are joining from the four corners of the country. So on to today's In Conversation. Big thank you to Kate Thwaites, the member for Jaga Jaga. I meant to check that for you, Jaga Jaga. Kate.
Jaga Jaga.
It is. Okay. I am actually from Melbourne originally, and I know Heidelberg Fairfield very well. So the ALP member for Jaga Jaga, and joining us for this conversation. We have a lot to touch on, and you have a very interesting career before politics, being a journalist for many years, working in the public service, working as an advisor to Jenny Macklin. And you were elected, Kate, in 2019, so the most recent federal election. You know, the women that do our courses, that attend these events, the whole idea about these is to make what is currently a very opaque process more transparent. So can you take us back to either the months before the election or the years before that election, and talk a little bit about your individual journey into politics? Did you have to go through pre-selection? Were you a long-time member of the party? Just break that down for us a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, firstly, thank you for having me today. It is so great to be able to talk to a group of women who are interested in politics and interested in shaping politics. It's important. I'm on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respect to their elders past, present, and emerging. So for me, look, my political journey, I'm not a long-term member of the party. I'm not someone who, you know, when I was in high school thought, I'm going to be Prime Minister of our country one day, I'm running for Parliament. I did actually really want to be a journalist, and that's what I became when I left school. And I was a journalist at the ABC, basically all through my 20s. And I did a lot of political reporting, mainly on state politics here in Victoria. And I loved my job, and I found it really important holding politicians to account. But I found I got to the point where I thought, look, I do a lot of holding people to account and talking about what other people are doing. What would it be like if I was part of the doing and actually trying to make things different rather than talking about people making things different? So I took a career shift. I moved out of working for the ABC and went to work for Oxfam, which is a not-for-profit. Really enjoyed that. Thought, yep, this international development caper is so interesting. There's, you know, really fascinating issues here. I'm going to make this my career. And then I got a call saying, would you be interested in working for Jenny Macklin? She's a senior cabinet minister in the Gillard government. You know, there's a job going. We think you'd be right for it. So how do you say no to that? You know, the opportunity to work for a very senior minister in a Labor government. So I said yes. And probably really that's the point at which this trajectory changed a bit for me, because doing that job for Jenny, so I worked for Jenny during the years of the Gillard government, was an opportunity for me to see up close what it looks like when you do have the power and levers of government at your hands and what you can do with that. So things like Australia's paid parental leave scheme, the NDIS for Australia, these were all things that Jenny was steering through her office. So I saw that really firsthand. I saw some really hard things really firsthand as well. I mean, as I'm sure you all remember, the Gillard years were hard, and it was a hard environment to be operating in. And to be honest, when I left Canberra in 2013, having done that, I was pretty burnt out, and I was like, I'm not going back to that place. You know, there's a lot of pretty difficult things that happened there. It was a great experience, but I don't want to go back. And yeah, so I went and worked in the public service here in Victoria. And when Jenny announced her retirement in 2018, My daughter was about 4 months old. And I think actually it was just right timing for me in an odd way. I know it sounds like an odd thing to say that you decide to run for pre-selection when your daughter's 4 months old. But for me, it actually meant I had that space from other things in my life. And I thought, what is really important to me? What do I want to achieve? And for me, this was a way to really be honest about the fact that I think you achieve a lot in politics and you achieve a lot through government, that government has a big impact on people's lives, and that I could make a difference in this. So I put my hand up. I did have to go through pre-selection. It was a fairly speedy pre-selection just because of the timing of where everything was up leading up to the next election. But I had to make a number of phone calls, seeking support. I had to, appear at a meeting, explaining why, I'd be the best candidate. And, funny story around that. It sort of coincided right with my daughter going through her 4-month sleep regression. I don't know if any of you have had bad experiences with that, but my daughter was terrible. And so I'd had this window of sleep, between about 8 to sort of 11 when I first got her down. Like, I had to make sure I was asleep then, because otherwise I wouldn't get anything for the rest of the night. And this meeting went late. And, I'm trying to explain why I should be pre-selected. All the while I'm just thinking, I'm just losing my sleep window. I just really need to get to sleep. Anyway, but look, that's a bit by the by. But, it is one of those things that I think, for when women are standing for election, these are some of the things that we are up against. So I went through a pre-selection process. I was successful. I was surrounded by a really good team who helped me get elected, and I was elected in 2019. So that's it. Yeah.
Well, I love the story, and thank you for that. And, there's some key things in that. We're doing courses every month, and a lot of the time we hear, I wish I joined the party 10 years ago because it's too late now. And we just keep saying over and over, no, that's not correct. So that's your experience.
Absolutely.
You're now sitting in Canberra.
Yes, exactly. That's right. Look, I think building connections and reaching out to people in the party or parties is really important, whichever party aligns with your particular viewpoint. But no, I don't think it's the case that you necessarily have to have been a member for 20 years or whatever.
Yeah. And then the other piece that you said there that really resonated for me was timing. Again, that is something that we try to reiterate over and over and over, that timing has a big place to put. It's not everything, but it's a lot. And if there's disruption in a seat or somebody's resigning or whatever that happens to be, then it's important to take that opportunity when it's presented. You did it with a 4-month-old. So, that it can be done in nearly every scenario, I would suggest, if you've done it there. So tell us a little bit about, you were elected in 2019 in terms of, and you're elected at the federal level. What is the percentage ratio that you spend in your electorate versus in Canberra? And give us some tangible examples, I guess, about how your involvement in politics has benefited your community.
Yes, such a good question, because I think, obviously we have a number of levels of government. The Canberra level, I think people actually tend not to see as much the work we do in community. They do see a lot of what we do in Canberra, but less of what we do in community. And actually what I love about my job is that I can blend both. So I can go out into the community, talk to people at a really local level. And when you're talking to people at a local level, they don't really care so much whether you're state government, local government, federal government. They just want to know that you've heard them and you can help steer them on the direction to trying to fix whatever it is that's going on in their lives. So, it's everything from talking to sports clubs to talking to local groups who are providing food aid, to, working with the local hospital, the local university, just having chats with people on the street. And so I do all of that. And then actually what I do with that is bundle that up and take it to Canberra into discussions with the people in my party room. So it helps to shape Labor policy, and also obviously what I raise on the floor of Parliament to try and influence the government, given we're currently in opposition. And so I actually love the fact that I get those two elements in my job. I get that really local level, and I really enjoy talking to people hearing about people's lives and working out how I can connect with that and support them. And I enjoy that level in Canberra where it's like, well, how does this translate into policy? What does it look like if we're trying to make this something that we both support this person but apply it across other people's lives as well? In terms of timings, obviously everything's very different because of COVID. In a normal time, it would be that you spend about half the year in Canberra and half the year in your community. Travel restrictions mean that's less so at the moment. And it's odd, it is a difficult time for me, like everyone. What I was just talking about those conversations that I have with people in the community are obviously very different at the moment. I can't stand on a street corner with my sign and say, come and have a chat. I can't go to the sporting event or the primary school fete on the weekend and have the chats. My office at the moment, though, and I at the moment are doing a lot of support for people who are finding themselves in situations where they've never been before. So people who are having contact with Centrelink for the first time, and those of you who have had contact with Centrelink would know it's often not a very easy process. So we support people with that. We support people who are struggling with the NDIS. We're supporting Australians who, would normally live in my electorate but are stranded overseas at the moment. And you get really tangible outcomes for those people. So one of the ways that I do support my community is by raising their voices and helping them through what otherwise can be, a bureaucratic shutdown or a blocked path. And particularly at this time of COVID, that I find that really important.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I think, you're right. The imagery we see all the time, and again, something that we're trying to tackle is it's people in the chamber, particularly women, and in sometimes not always the most flattering positions in the chamber either. So whereas so much of the role of a politician, whether you're a councillor, federal, Senate, state, is in the community, and women are already doing so many things in the community. So it shows how transferable those skills are as well. So yeah, well, let me go now to first lockdown, the 2020. So you had a toddler at home, you were pregnant, directives were coming out from federal parliament in terms of, in order to attend, you have to either isolate at home with your family for a fortnight, you have to isolate in Canberra, very problematic. And I think you were very vocal at that time about how you and others, not just you, but how other MPs were really being put under the pump and not being allowed to represent your community. Through being vocal, tell me what changed, what shifted through that time, what shifted since, and what do we still have to shift?
Yes, big question. So yes, at that time when we were, it was really during Melbourne's big lockdown, so lockdown 2. As you say, I was pregnant, couldn't go to Canberra for 14 weeks because every single for 14 days before a sitting week, because every period seemed to line up with when I had a, checkup or needed some kind of medical appointment, which I didn't think the Canberra hospital was going to appreciate me just waltzing in and saying, hey, I'm here for a checkup. So a lot of parliaments around the world particularly the UK Parliament, had by that stage moved to allowing virtual parliament. And what I wanted was for our Parliament to be able to do similar because, particularly as a first-term MP, I think, and in a time of crisis, it was really important to me that being pregnant and having a small child didn't mean that my community didn't have their voices heard in the Parliament. It was so important to me that I was still able to do my job and represent them as they should be represented, and have them know that I was able to do that and that they were being heard in the Parliament. So I was advocating together with others very strongly for us to allow for the option of parliamentarians to work remotely and to speak virtually like we are now. And even though most businesses across Australia had already pivoted to that, because this was lockdown 2 and other businesses had pretty quickly moved to Zooms and Teams and all those things we use, the Parliament, as an institution, is probably not all that tech savvy, I would say. And there were a lot of concerns from people who had been in the parliament for some time about both the traditions of democracy that sit in the parliament, but also I think about some of the security implications of a virtual parliament and the influences that may be on people if they're attending parliament remotely. So the compromise position we arrived at, which we still have in place now, which is that we participate virtually. So when I can't get to Canberra, which I can't again at the moment, similar requirements at the moment. At the moment, I'd have to quarantine 14 days when I get back here, and my whole family would have to quarantine with me. Again, keeping a 3.5-year-old in the house for 14 days is not an ideal solution. So I'm doing Parliament remotely again. What that means is I can speak, raise the concerns of my community, be involved in that way. I can't vote, which means I get paired out. So this is where being in a major party is actually quite an advantage, because it just means you get paired out with a member of the other party, so that numbers don't shift. So yes, I did have to make that argument both on my own side of politics and obviously through senior people on my own side of politics to the government as well. I'm really pleased we put that change in place. It's obviously allowed me to continue to participate. I know it's had, it is mainly women who take up caregiving at times like this, as we know. So it has had a big impact for a lot of women across the parliament. And I think more broadly than that, what you've been talking about a lot is the hesitancy a lot of women feel about putting their hands up for parliament. And I think part of that hesitancy for women at a federal level is that time away from their families. What am I going to do if my kid's sick? What does that look like if we're at a particular point where it's crunch in both of our careers and I have to be away for 2 weeks? So I would like virtual to become an option going forward when there are those crunch periods where people have particular caregiving responsibilities, or perhaps they have a personal illness that means they need to stay for treatment in one place, allowing them still to do their job without having to put the travel in place.
Yeah. Okay. Well, there's a number of reviews going on, and I suspect we're going to have some questions about that as well, because obviously there is still work to do to what I'd say is decrease the barriers to entry and allow a more diverse, selection of people to represent our community. So might come back to that, because right now I'd like to go to the book that you've written, or that you've co-authored, I should say, with Jenny Macklin, your former boss, is that right? And former member for Jaga Jaga. So, and it's titled Enough is Enough. And I know your publishers very kindly have offered to provide a discount code for our attendees, which we're putting in the chat right now. It's been described as an investigation into the culture of sexual violence and harassment in Parliament House, and also a call for structural change. I've listened to a couple of podcasts about the book. Now, if I take a step back, you were a staffer. You were a staffer for Jenny, and were attending Canberra, and obviously so much of, I guess, the terrible news, heinous news we've heard has related to staffers. Did your experience as a staffer help, I guess, inform writing this book?
It did, not in the sense that I actually had a terrible experience when I was a staffer. So for me personally, Parliament House was a really demanding environment, but it was not an environment in which I was harassed or assaulted or anything like that. So, on a personal level, that's not my experience. But one of the reasons why I wanted to write the book was because I have worked in that environment, and I do not think that anyone in that environment should be harassed or assaulted or bullied. And having worked in the environment, I have both the experience of having seen what the structures are from that perspective, but also now from the position of an MP. So I feel an absolute responsibility to all the women who are staffers and who have been staffers. And now in the role as an MP, I see how inadequate some of the structures we have in place are. for making sure that it's a safe workplace. So that's how it came together for me. And I do actually say in the book, my experience as a staffer was overwhelmingly positive in that I worked for a strong woman under a strong PM. There were a number of strong women in the cabinet. Actually, what I saw was women ruling the roost and getting things done. And that was the experience that's also propelled me to be an MP. But it is absolutely unacceptable that, women are unsafe in the Parliament. And a lot of those women as staffers don't have the voice that I have as an MP. So that's really part of what drove up Jenny and I to write the book.
Yes, well, I think, you kind of wrapped up that next question. I mean, there's a number of women in Parliament, be they there currently, be them different parties, be them retired, but you and Jenny have taken it upon yourselves to write this book. And I totally understand that. I guess you do have a unique experience in terms of being a staffer, being an MP, working under a female MP prior under a female Prime Minister. In fact, that is quite a unique experience. So thank you for taking the time, and in any way we can amplify the book. Obviously, we are committed to doing that. In fact, I love this statement in the promotion of the book. As women, we believe in the power of politics to do good, and as feminists, we recognise that politics is about power. Getting it, holding on to it, and using it to improve citizens' lives. I hear that. What do you think that 2021 is different this time? Is there something unique about this period that we've just gone through that provides almost an unprecedented platform for change? Will it melt away? What are your views on that?
I think it is different, and I think one of the major differences is the bravery of a lot of young women. So I have to pay tribute to Brittany Higgins, to Grace Tame, to other women who have spoken out about their experiences and who have said it is no longer acceptable to be silent about these things and for them to be dealt with behind closed doors. And I think through their bravery, what we have seen is so many women across Australia say, yes, I have shared part or all of this experience and it's not acceptable. And, when I talk about politics being a vehicle for creating change, part of what you need to create change is to be able to talk about the problem. And that's what we are doing at the moment in a way that we have never done before. Now, that's not an end in itself, obviously, but it is actually a really big thing in allowing us to talk about it and push for further change. I think what it also means is that the ability for those in power to sweep this issue under the carpet is a lot harder than it has been in the past. So we can raise it. We are raising it. One of the things we talk about in the book and that Jenny and I spend a lot of time going back and forth on actually is just this question around what's different now and what has changed. And Jenny, like many members of that Gillard cabinet, has reflected on her time there and really reflected that she wished at the time she could have called out some of the misogynistic treatment of Julia. But at the time, the decision they all made, and probably most of you have heard Julia reflect on this as well, the decision they all made was that, that was a distraction and they needed to focus on the big issues. And in fact, probably if they had have done so at the time, they would have just been accused of playing the gender card. Now, if you're calling these issues out now, you are no longer just being accused of playing the gender card. You are, there is a discussion going on that hasn't happened before. So I think that is a really big thing in momentum for change. Like I said, it's obviously not everything. We've still got a really long way to go and a lot of work to do, but it does mean, I think, that this moment is different.
Yes, I share your view, and I know our board shares your view as well. Just in fact, the sheer number of women that are mobilising even to our courses and other equivalent courses is unprecedented. So there has been a shift about how women can get involved, whether that be running themselves, whether it be helping another woman to run. And it gives me a lot of hope, actually. So now I wanted to talk briefly about the Kate Jenkins review that's happening currently. I'll just encourage anyone to put a question in the chat, because I'll be coming to questions shortly. So Kate Jenkins, who's the Sex Discrimination Commissioner, currently working on a review of Parliament House as a workplace. It's due to be tabled late October, early November, I believe. Explain to us, how does Parliament House as a workplace differ from the workplaces that we all find ourselves working in, where it's very clear to us the structures that you put in place, but there's complexities about Parliament House. Can you shine a light a little bit on that?
Yeah, look, it is a really different workplace, and I have worked across a few different workplaces in my career. A few things that I think make it really different. One is that home away from home environment. So I don't like the phrase Canberra bubble, because I kind of think it almost excuses bad behaviour, but while you are there, you are living, breathing everything that happens in that building. And, you know, when I go home from a parliamentary sitting day, it's not like when I come home here and my partner hands me the baby, it's like it's your turn to change the nappy deal. You know, it is going out to dinner with some journos and some colleagues to keep talking about what's happened in the day. So all the power structures, all the things that you're concerned about and caught up with happen in that building. So you've got this sort of hothouse environment there. Alongside that, you have an environment where it just does not have the sort of professional HR and accountability systems that other professional workplaces do have these days. So as an MP, I'm an employer, and as a minister, they're employers as well. And it's mainly ministerial staff who are the staffers in Parliament House, those of us who are backbenchers. Sort of most of our staff work in our electorate. And so you are employed by an individual boss, but actually that boss, unlike in a big government department or a private company, doesn't have an HR department that supports them. They haven't had training around, what does workplace harassment look like? They don't actually have anywhere independent really to turn for advice when someone comes to them and says, a staff member or a colleague or whatever has done this, what happens now? So there's this absolute lack of an independent structure to deal with harassment, lack of an independent structure to provide MPs and ministers as employers with the type of leadership and workplace leadership training that you would expect in another professional environment at the moment. And the other big part of what Jenny and I talk about in the book is there's a lack of consequences for bad behaviour. So because the whole building is geared around politics and politics works to numbers, what that means is bad behaviour will be tolerated if, the Prime Minister of the day or the leader of the day feels that dealing with it is going to threaten their numbers on the floor of the House. So what we argue for very firmly in the book is a change to that sort of structure. Again, looking overseas at experiences there, we're not the only parliament in the world to be going through these types of problems. US, UK, New Zealand all have similar issues. And in the UK, they've put in place a model where they now have an independent committee, entirely independent of MPs, made up of experts who deal with cases of bullying and sexual harassment, investigate them, and recommend consequences for the perpetrator. And in the most serious cases, those consequences can include the perpetrator being removed from the parliament if they're an MP. Now, that has to be confirmed by a vote on the floor of the House, because obviously those people are democratically elected. But that is a really big step to say that actually if you do this sort of behaviour, the consequence is you can lose your job as an MP. And it's just a consequence that really isn't there for us at the moment. So I very much hope that in the work Kate Jenkins is doing, those are the types of things that we will get in place. We will get the independent structures to help train MPs as employers, the independent structures to help employees have a place to go to that is properly set up to take complaints to, and that we will get genuine consequences for bad behaviour.
Yeah, that's a nice three-way summation. I think that's what we all hope come out of the review. And then obviously there's the tabling of the review, but then there's the executing on the outcomes as well. So which is the second tangible piece that I think needs to happen as well, obviously. Now, Kate, I'm going to go to some questions that have come through the chat. I actually have a couple more questions for you, but I am going to come back to that. So from Kimberly, did you join a faction?
Yes, I'm a member of the left faction of the Labor Party. So for those of you who are sort of not that closely,
you have to?
You don't have to. So not all Labor members are aligned, but most are. And I would say, you know, in the Labor Party, we sort of have a more formal structure of factions than they do in the Liberal Party, but they also have groupings and people who work together and support each other. So yes, I'm a member of the left faction. Okay.
We have then a number of questions in relation to virtual voting. So obviously you can attend, you can ask questions and everything, you can do everything but vote. Why can't you vote virtually?
Yeah, good question. So the reason that rule has been put in place is when we're in Parliament House, you have to vote in the chamber. So you probably all know that the bells start ringing, they ring for 4 minutes, wherever you are in the building, drop your business, get into the chamber, otherwise you actually don't vote. And the idea behind that is you have to be physically present so we can see it's you casting your vote, no one else, and that there's no influences on you. So the argument that's been put to me around that is that with people voting in their electorate or in their home, you actually don't know who's standing around them saying, hey, you have to vote this way. And there are, you know, security or foreign influence implications around that. Now, I don't know I necessarily agree with all of that. I think it's a discussion we could keep having about how we might be able to put remote voting in place safely as well. But at the moment, that's where we're at. And to be honest, it felt like a big win to get virtual parliament in place. So I'm taking that at the moment and, you know, we can work on the next part down the track.
Yeah, I think sometimes you can't get the full win. So I understand that, you know, it's steps. There is a comment here, if a global pandemic can't create it, then what can? But, you know, I guess enough people in the chamber that want to see changes is what creates the change.
Absolutely. And look, I do understand all this. And obviously when I talk to my community, I say, oh, we've got virtual parliament. They're like, yeah, sure. We've all been working remotely for how long? Like, what's wrong with you guys that you take so long to sort these things out? So I do absolutely understand that. And I think, it was a big move for the parliament and for people who have been there a long time to be able to shift to allow for virtual presence. So I think what we have there is we're showing it can be done and that future changes can come as well.
Yeah, yep. There's a question from Kate here. If Kate hadn't been a staffer and hadn't had positive experiences before running, would you still have run? It's a difficult question to answer, obviously, but there's been a lot of coverage about how dangerous and corrosive it can potentially be. So,
Look, that's a good question, and it is a bit hard to answer hypothetically, obviously, because those are my experiences and they do all add up. I think for me, I was talking about the fact that I've really been overall in my career on a trajectory from always thinking politics, government is important, to how do I use those things to shape the community I want to live in and I want for everyone else. So can I guarantee that I would have put my hand up to be an MP if I hadn't had that opportunity to see up close that actually it could be a very positive thing? Maybe not, but also, I hope in talking to all of you today, part of what I'm telling you is that it can be a really positive thing. And in fact, that's, another one of the reasons why Jenny and I wanted to write this book, because we do, I didn't put my hand up. I'm not a parliamentarian because I think it's a waste of time. I put my hand up because I think this is where you get genuine change for women and people across our community who need a fairer society. And, in writing the book, we wanted to make the point of the fact that our parliament has actually made some really important changes for for women. So the Sex Discrimination Act brought in by Susan Ryan in 1984, an absolute game changer for women. And we are still, you know, really feeling the effects of that in terms of how we work and how we live our lives as women in Australia. The paid parental leave scheme, which came in 10 years ago, the Labor government brought in, you know, before that, particularly for women in low paid and insecure work, they had no access to paid leave when they had a baby, and most of them ended up dropping out of the workforce. Now that's changed because of that scheme. The commitment Labor's bringing forward now to make childcare more affordable for 97% of Australian families. Now, you know, again, I've talked about having young kids. I can't tell you how many times in the playground, the swing conversation I have with the woman standing next to me is about how she's going back to work 3 days a week because they can't afford the childcare for the extra 2 days a week. That policy will transform that. You know, this is what happens when women are in Parliament. So part of what I want to say is it is absolutely worthwhile.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Yeah, of course, you know, we need that lived experience around those decision-making tables. It's just, it's never been clearer, I think, in that respect. So I have a couple more questions here. Coral, thank you. They brought in rules for voting virtually for local councils. Why not borrow those for federal parliament? Is that a constitutional thing, or is the Constitution used as a kind of straw man argument?
It's not constitutional. It'd be the standing orders of the Parliament. So the Constitution doesn't really set out how Parliament should operate, just what federally we're responsible for. So no, it would be around changing the standing orders of Parliament. But yes, absolutely, we should be looking to government, local government. We should be looking to the experience overseas, you know, seeing where we can learn and develop from.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, so it's it can be done. It's not as difficult as changing constitution, for example. Yeah. It's about having the will. So thank you, Kimberly. With the boss to employer relationship in Canberra, obviously there's a lack of organisational setup to respond to allegations, but is there a different legal obligation as an employer?
There has been.
Canberra versus elsewhere?
Yes, actually there has been part of, you know, I just talked about the Sex Discrimination Act. Parliamentarians are actually exempt from falling under the Sex Discrimination Act. Outrageous.
Like judges?
Yes, like judges. Just should not be the case. And, you know, again, I think when all the men who were responsible for, you know, who people like Susan Ryan needed to help them pass these legislation were looking at it, it was very much that idea around, well, I need to be able to employ who I need to employ. And they look, you know, again, you know, staffing is a really unique role, and the level of trust your boss places in you is really high, and your boss is obviously responsible for a lot. But no, we should not be exempt from the Sex Discrimination Act, and that is going to change. There will be legislation to change that.
Yeah, fantastic. Glad to hear it. Louise, I guess more a comment, but something I wanted to address. I hear from people that they don't want to go into politics because it's such a toxic environment. Look, that is something we address in every workshop and training conference that we do every time, probably more than once in each event too. And I'm not going to say that, you know, it hasn't been a bad experience for some people, because clearly it has. But what we never, ever hear about is all the positive things that happen. And that's why we run these monthly events. We're massively informed, I feel, on the negatives of going into politics, but let's balance that with all the positives, you know, the amazing work that Kate is doing for her community. Last month's interviewee, Kelly O'Dwyer, what she managed to achieve, and Sharman Stone next week, and it goes on, the counsellors that we speak to. And keep in mind that the whole "it's toxic, why would you want to do it" narrative is there to keep you out. It's something to consider.
Yeah, look, you know, there are parts of Parliament that are really hard. There's parts of public life that are really hard, right? So I'm not going to pretend that's not easy and you don't get rude comments on your Facebook, and you don't have men shouting stupid things across the chamber. That happens. For me, I think being true to the purpose of why you're there. So I always remind myself of actually what am I trying to achieve in this place, and that is I'm trying to achieve better things for my community, and this is the place I can do it in. And the other thing is, there is a strong group of women in Parliament, and this is probably easier on my side of politics than it is on the Liberal side, to be honest. But I know on my side of politics that if I am being harassed, if men are saying stupid things, there are women around me like Penny and Tanya and Katie and all these women who have lived that environment and who I can talk to and who will help me call these things out and keep working on changing them. Women like Julia show us that it's tough, but it can be done. And the more of us who are there, I think, the more that environment changes. And I'm not going to pretend that women are, inherently better people, or that we don't always agree on all the politics. I don't have the same ideas all the time as the Liberal women across the aisle from me. They will believe in different things and want different things. But we do have a lived experience, and we do have ways of working that I think are often different to men. And having more women in the Parliament, I think, makes those ways of working seem more normal and more common, rather than a sort of hyper masculine environment.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I find, so much research been done overseas. Equivalent research hasn't been done here about what happens to parliamentary chambers when you get gender parity, and that women tend to work more collaboratively across party lines. Chambers become less adversarial. Women MPs are more visible in their electorates. This is what the research tells us. But it is curious because Australia is the only country, I believe, in the OECD that doesn't have a cross-party women's caucus or forum. I know we've had a couple of cracks at it in the past. I think Jenny might have been part of having a crack at it in the past. Do you see a place for such a forum in the future at some stage?
I think there absolutely could be a place for such a forum, for sort of shared experiences and working out how the Parliament works and all those sort of things. And I think that's important. I think probably one of the barriers at the moment, I was watching Misrepresented, I'm sure a lot of you did as well. And there were some really crucial moments in that series where it did remind us of women getting together across party lines for battles such as RU486 and other significant battles. I think maybe one of the big things that has changed since that time is the number of women on the Labor side of politics in Parliament. And that's changed because the Labor Party did actually bring in a quota rule. And so we have to be there. That's a really good thing. I'm really pleased we have that. But I think what it sort of means is, as I was saying, on a Labor side, I actually have a lot of women in my party I can turn to. And for the Liberal women, I just... I obviously don't want to speak on behalf of them, but I don't know how useful it would be for them to be able to go into their party room and say, hey, I've agreed with all the Labor women on this. We need to do it now. I think there is a part now where they need to start lifting their numbers of women because, again, I do not sit in their party room, so I can't speak directly to it. But, looking at things like what Julia Banks said, I think they seem to still be in the stage where men in that party room can't quite hear the voices of the women all the time. And, one of the things that I think more women in the room does means that happens a lot less. You do get women's voices heard. I talked before about our childcare policy. That was the policy that Labor put forward as our budget reply last year. Now, that's a really big political moment. And I do not think that our really big political moment would have been used for a childcare policy if we were not a party that had strong women putting forward policies in the shadow cabinet, and a shadow cabinet that was used to, over these years, with more and more Labor women coming in, listening to those ideas and not doing that thing blokes do when, one woman in the room raises an idea where they're like, nice, let's keep talking about something else because we didn't quite process that in our male brains. I think, yes, absolutely room for working cross-party, but I also think at the moment part of the challenge is about, we've still got work to do on the Labor side, but I do think there needs to be some tough thinking on the other side about what does it look like for them to have more women in the Parliament.
Yep, interesting comments. I'm gonna take a couple more from the chat, and then I promised you, I believe, that you could be gone by 10 to. So, so from Chanel, not being a standard 9-to-5 job, how does being a federal MP fit into your family life, particularly with young kids? You know, you've got an under 1-year-old and a 3-year-old, it sounds like. So
yeah. So I've got a 3.5-year-old and a 7-month-old. My partner is currently on full-time leave. So when I had Gilbert, my son, December last year, I took a few months off, and then my partner's been on leave ever since he was born. He'll go back to work part-time in November. So the first thing I'd say is you need a really supportive partner. They are big jobs. They're not 9-to-5 jobs. So it is that balance between discussing how that works as a family. You know, whether that's partner or grandparents or paid care or whatever it is, that there is a need for extra support, I think, there. You know, the sort of the non-9-to-5 bit can be an advantage in terms of small kids as well, obviously. So, you know, the things that some people come up against, you know, my daughter's doing 1 day a week at sessional kinder this year, which finishes at 2:45. How is that even a thing? It finishes at 2:45. But, you know, to a degree, while I'm in Melbourne and not in Canberra, I am in control of my own schedule. So I can make sure there's nothing in my diary for 2:45 and go get her. And then, you know, I might still have to jump on a Zoom at 7 o'clock that night or something like that. But I have a degree of flexibility around that. To the same degree, you know, in the period earlier this year when I was getting to Canberra, I took my baby and my partner with me while Harriet, my daughter, stayed here with her grandparents. So there is a level of flexibility that I can also bring to it. That means, yes, absolutely, sometimes it's a mad scramble and we're not quite sure how we're going to do it. But also a level of being your own boss and being able to set what that looks like to a degree.
Yeah, I can see the silver lining about flexibility currently that might not have been there otherwise. Do you still have a couple of minutes, Kate? Because there's a couple that have...
I can do, yes, another 10, up to 2.
Yeah, okay. Amazing, because there's been a couple of other kind of cracking questions that have come through. One from Cecilia, and I really wanted to come on to this. Sometimes I find it frustrating when we're still at the stage of creating more representation of women, and probably don't speak enough to increasing the representation of cultural diversity. So other than encouraging more diverse women joining politics and addressing the structure issues, what would you also suggest that we do?
Yeah, that is a really good point. And we do talk about this in the book as well. You know, federal parliament in particular, it does represent the diversity of our country. And I think a lot of that is some of the things that we've been talking about why people don't see themselves in that place. I do think things like remote parliament, absolutely an advantage to women, but also an advantage to people who might see themselves more in community than standing in the chamber, and see that blend as sort of appealing. And one of the other things I talk about in the book is reforming question time, which is one of the big set pieces of parliament that everyone sees, but I think again plays to this really set idea of what it looks like to be an MP, that you can shout the loudest and you've got some hilarious joke for your mates in the back that you whip out, and that's kind of how you win the day. You know, it doesn't have to be like that. We don't have to run question time like that. And I think making changes to that, because it is the part of parliament that so many of our community sees, would have a big difference to who sees themselves as maybe wanting to put themselves forward to be an MP. You know, I've talked about quotas and what a difference they've made on the Labor side in terms of getting women into parliament. We might be getting to the stage where we should look at quotas for diversity as well, because absolutely we need to have a much more diverse parliament in place.
Yes, and you know, great question, Cecilia, and I wanted to bring it up also for a couple of reasons. I mean, our sister organisation, Politics in Colour, please get in touch with me if there's some way we can specifically help you. They run bespoke training organisations, particularly not just addressing the barriers to entry that we focus on in all of our training, but the increased barriers to entry that women of colour face when they run. So if that's something that appeals to you, then get in touch with me, direct message me now, and we'll make that happen. And also another thing, our parliament versus the US versus the UK versus Canada, so unbelievably a lack of cultural diversity, like so white, pale, male style. And one of the reasons is Section 44 in our Constitution. We don't allow you to run at a federal level if you've got diversity. But at local council and state, that isn't in place. So, but at the federal level, it is. And that's a real impediment at this stage. So I just wanted to drop that in there as well. I'm not a constitutional expert. Makes me sound like it today, but I'm not. There was one from Deborah here that I wanted to talk about in terms of pre-selection. Is pre-selection the only way an established party will allow a member to stand for an election? Do you think a female going in as an independent is a waste of time, considering the steep climb to be heard and campaigning and so forth? What's your views on that?
Yeah, so really good question there. So pre-selection is essentially just a term for being a party's candidate. So pre-selections happen in a whole range of different ways, even within parties. Sometimes they're very long, drawn-out processes where you will canvass every single local member. Sometimes they happen in a shorter period of time. And essentially what you're doing is you're asking that party to endorse you to be their candidate with your face and their logo on the billboards for the election. So yes, if you want to run for a major party, you have to be pre-selected. And as I said, a number of ways that process can play out. And I think the other way to think about that is it's also a part where party members get to have their say. And, that's not a bad thing in terms of a democracy. If you're a member of a local branch of a local party, being able to have a say on who your local member is quite important to those people, and fair enough. In terms of independence, there have been and there are some very effective independents in our parliament, and I admire them and I admire the work they do. I think it is a really hard slog. You do, if you're not in a situation where it's a hung parliament, where obviously you do actually have immense power, breaking through and being able to influence, I think, is challenging for those members of parliament. So, I think there are benefits to being part of a major party, and for me, a major party that is a party of government, because I want to be in government. I don't like being in opposition. It is not much fun. I want to be in government so I can be part of shaping our country and shaping people's lives for the better. And that is what you get to do from a major party, and those are the conversations you get to have with the people who can influence that. So yes, absolutely, independence, good on them, all power to them, and I think they do a wonderful job of representing their communities in a lot of cases. But I suppose I would say, as a member of the Labor Party, I think sometimes, and I think particularly for women, there can be this sense that, the major parties are a bit toxic and you wouldn't want to be part of that. And really probably the only way is to run as an independent. And I would say that's not my view, that I think, a major party can actually give you that support and can give you that voice and that influence that is actually, very important in terms of doing your job.
Thank you, Kate. That yes, you do have to go pre-selection. It's like the campaign before you run a campaign is how we talk about it in all of our training workshops.
Yes.
The double campaign. But look, there's one last question and then we're going to let you go. You've been very gracious with your time. We really appreciate it, Kate. Now, year to date, in your view, has the culture in Parliament changed, or has the culture in Question Time changed? Considering Sarah Hanson-Young's defamation, considering the current review going on, considering, Brittany Higgins' news, has the culture changed?
That is such a good question, because I think it's sort of yes, but no.
Around the edges? Or?
Which sounds very politician-like of me. Sorry, I will try and clarify what I'm trying to say there. There are bits that are still atrocious in our parliament. So Christian Porter is currently the acting leader of the House. Just a disgrace that someone who, there has not been an independent independent investigation into the allegations, and really serious allegations against Christian Porter. And I think there should be an independent investigation before he is put in a position where we're saying you have the moral authority to be the leader of the parliament. So, that's really disappointing. I found Barnaby Joyce being re-elected as Deputy Prime Minister very disappointing for the same reasons, because a woman made sexual harassment allegations against him and then said she was really disappointed with how the National Party handled those allegations and investigated them. So, those things are saying, unfortunately, that I think the Prime Minister, to be honest, just isn't taking this seriously yet. But having said that, I think, yes, is it changing? Yes, because we are having these conversations that we have not had in other years. And we have had wins. We have got virtual parliament going. Kate Jenkins is doing a review that is being talked about and that we are participating in. There are changes being made to the rules at Parliament. And, one of the things about politics, which I think can be hard, is you don't get change in a big bang, or very rarely do you get change in a big bang. Change is hard and change takes time. So I think changes are happening and they will continue to happen, but we've got to keep pushing for it, and we've got to realise that it won't all happen overnight.
Thank you so much, Kate, and thank you everyone for the interaction. There was heaps of questions coming through then. Kate, please, thank you for being a woman in politics in Australia, and all the best for your political career. All the best for not being in opposition forever either. So, but we do appreciate your time today. I've just put in the chat about future events, so check out our future events, including our next Equip training, which is in September. So if everyone can do the Zoom claps for Kate for today.
Thanks, all great discussion. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, everyone. Stay safe, and look forward to next month's conversation.